To introduce Rayner O'Connor, Lysaght from the Socialist Democracy Party. Thank you.
Thank you. As Noel in his fine speech pointed out, we are here to celebrate the memory of a genuine working class activist and hero, Frank Conroy. Frank lived a comparatively short life, but he packed in just about everything for the working class. And when he died, insofar as anything one could be said, Conroy, as I said, activist and hero. You heard from Noel some of the details of his life. And the fact that he died, as far as anyone can die, before their traditional allotted time, he died a happy death, fighting fascism, and before the divisions in the anti-fascist camp that became apparent the next year had developed. I've been asked to speak on the Dublin lockout, of which this is the 100th, the centenary year. You'll ask why, speaking of Frank Conroy, who died 23 years later, I should be speaking about those events. Well, there are two reasons. First of all, there is the matter of the obvious fact that Frank and Larkin and Connolly before him were all fighting the same fight, fighting for the rights, democratic rights, particularly the democratic rights of the workers, and to organise and speak. Secondly, there's a more immediate matter. After arising out of the Civil War, it must be said that the Labour Party was at its worst. It indeed anticipated what we are seeing with the Labour Party doing today, only perhaps more blatantly. Two events happened during the Spanish Civil War. Firstly, there was the Keyes affair, when the deputy for County Limerick, Michael Keyes, stood on a platform of a body calling itself the Irish Christian Front, which was sent to get supplies for the fascists in Spain. And the matter was raised by Uncle Price at the Labour Party conference, and it was swept, the leadership swept it under the carpet after Keyes said that he didn't really know what he was doing and would try not to do that sort of thing again. At the same Congress, annual meeting of the Labour Party, there was a motion put by a young student of Trinity College, a guy called Conor Cruz O'Brien, who would become notorious later on, but he was on the right side in this case. He was moving a motion denouncing the fascist Italian occupation of Ethiopia. And in it, he was a very clever student, to try a clever student thing by bringing into his introduction a denunciation of the fascists in Spain. And the Labour Party went ape, the delegates went ape, and they just started attacking the whole motion. And in fact, that was the time when one of the deputies actually announced that he was a Catholic first and a Labour Party member second, thus abandoning the principles of even Daniel O'Connell. The motion was finally passed after Bill O'Brien, the chairman, no relation of Conor Cruz, ruled that it was only about Ethiopia and had nothing to do with Spain. so that he will raise the vote. Now, we're going to talk about how the party founded by Connolly and Larkin, the roots of it getting the way it did and the way it has today. And the roots are in the lockout. Immediately, this was a Pyrrhic victory for the employers. They did not abandon their central demand, the ban on the Irish Transport Union members, but only the lockout's inspirer, Murphy, and a few others enforced it. The union was weaker, but it survived. Its example inspired workers to organise themselves outside Dublin. But for now, the Dublin workers were weary. The militancy would begin to rise only during the First World War, provoked by austerity and becoming general only from the end of 1917. Indeed, the tramway workers would not organise themselves successfully for 20 years. And less obvious than all this was the lockout's effect on the Labour leadership. Now, this group recognised that the works had suffered a serious setback. The question was, why? Part of the answer was obvious. Once again, the strong, well-organised British unions had refused adequate support to a trade dispute brought by weaker Irish unions. Most Irish Labour leaders accepted this as the whole story and responded by putting their faith simply in building their organisations, the union organisations, to limit their dependence on their British comrades. It should not be exaggerated. It's not that the majority of the union leaders started thinking defensively. The lockout for them had been, after all, a defensive fight. And nor did those with socialist perspectives abandon them. But like too many of their comrades abroad, they assumed that socialism was inevitable, but had no strategy developed to achieve it. Accordingly, they followed the prescription of their leading theorist, James Connolly, and sought to build an industrial republic, their unions, within the shell of the political state, to a point where the unions would break out of that shell. Organisation was prioritised against agitation and education itself being restricted to propaganda. Larkin and Connolly recognised that something more was needed. Connolly, the theorist, examined the problem of bureaucratic degeneration in the Scottish Forward and in his article, Old Wine in New Bottle. His choice of organ showed that he considered his Irish comrades were inoculated from the British degeneration by their position in a colony, as indeed they were, just not enough. More generally, though in Old Wine, he insisted on the importance of maintaining militancy, he did not examine how this was to be done. Having experienced the political disagreements of self-styled vanguard parties, he'd come to regard such parties as irrelevant. More pragmatic, Larkin did see the need for working class leadership distinct from the union structure linked to it. His choice, however, was the Irish Citizen Army, which attracted many advanced and often socialist trade unions, but though made for the military struggle, it could not develop their consciousness on how to prepare politically for it. In any case, the outbreak of World War and Larkin's departure for America ended his attempt. The Citizen Army survived as, essentially, the ITGWU's military arm. Connolly succeeded Larkin, becoming their union's acting general secretary and army commander, preaching revolutionary openly and preparing it behind the backs even his own comrades. Had his grand moment been so, the revolutionaries might have mobilised a much larger base in the working class to work a more explicitly socialist, radically platform than that on which the revolution would be fought. Such postponement was barred on several points. Nobody knew that the war would last until 1918. Connolly knew that he was one, perhaps maybe the only one as far as he knew, of the Socialist International's upholders of its 1907 Stuttgart Congress resolution that directed socialists during a war to, quote, intervene in favour of its speedy termination and with all their powers to utilize the economic and political crisis created by the war to rouse the masses and thereby to hasten the downfall of capitalist rule. Moreover, the said crisis was accelerating the revival of militancy amongst Dublin workers, particularly the strategically important dockers employed by the Dublin Steam Packet Company. In the middle of this dispute, the IRB's military committee presented Connolly with the ultimatum that it would rise with or without him. But the rising made Connolly a bigger name than Larkin for surviving transport union leaders to use to attract recruits. By 1920 to 22, the union was bigger than it would be again for 3 decades. Simultaneously, the rebellion had magnified the existing negative qualities among union officials. Some were already so hostile to the citizen army. The transport union headquarters, Liberty Hall, was destroyed. Its general secretary was raided the USA. His replacement was executed, and for a month its general president, Tom Foran, was interned with other activists. It will later be said that an inquiry meeting of the union executive was held in the days after the insurgents surrendered to deprive Connolly of his position in union membership. This may be false, but it reflected a real attitude, and it was stronger than other unions, less militant than the transport union. So even had Connolly survived, he would have had major problems continuing his strategy. And his death left nobody capable of defending it against ordinary trade union practice that was underpinned periodically when the combined Congress and Labour Party met in Sligo in August 1916. This meeting was chaired by Thomas Johnson of the National Union of Shop Assistants. He was president of the Congress Party Executive, in which Connolly had been a first-time ordinary member. Connolly had complained about his indecision when they were both in the Belfast branch of the propagandist group, the Independent Labour Party of Ireland. They collaborated in moving the postponement of the 19th Congress Party meeting to, there was no meeting in 1915, because they feared with good reason that pro-war delegates would have a majority if it met as scheduled. But there was, despite this tactical agreement, there was a strategic difference. Connolly was a revolutionary and a defeatist seeking to execute the Stuttgart Resolution and sabotage the United Kingdom war efforts. Johnson was a reformist and a pacifist, seeking peace without victory for either side, and favouring of the two, that of the United Kingdom on its allies, because, as he said in Sligo presidential address, France is still a republic more firmly established. Of course, he didn't mention Britain's other major ally, Tsarist Russia. To Labour, he offered a perspective to, quote, create a strong party with a practical programme of social reconstruction with democracy, political and social, as an ideal and a method. An intelligent advocacy of such a programme and its application by public bodies wherever possible will be the surest way of rallying the workers of Ulster to the banner of a united Ireland, free, democratic and self-governing. Okay, so what was wrong with that? Well, firstly, Johnson's strong party was a strengthened Congress party, not even an independent Labour body. This was particularly egregious in that the Irish workers made up less than half the working population. The balance was composed of small farmers for whom Johnson's practical programme of agricultural cooperation was acceptable only by example. Secondly, while the whole idea of drafting and presenting a practical program of social reconstruction was useful, its fulfillment was presented as strictly electoral. Although Johnson defended the right of workers to strike, for him state power was to be achieved only through the ballot box. This reversed Connolly's position. Thirdly, this was the greater defect in what was a developing revolutionary situation from 1916. And finally, in connection with this, there's no mention of the motor of that situation, the Irish national question. The workers of Ulster vote is the nearest it gets. This was perhaps natural only a few months after the Rising, with many still in internment, but it reflects a deeper prejudice shown in the speech's other link of insurgents and British Army recruits as equally worthy honour and attacking the national habit of mind as the cause of war. Again, Connolly was abandoned. But Johnson's listeners were happy to overlook this. They continued to work determinedly to fulfil Connolly's directive in Johnson's spirit. The industrial state was to be built until it smashed the shell of the political state, presumably by mobilizing its own citizens' votes at the ballot box in alliance with the small farmer co-ops. No short cuts were possible. In April 1917, Connolly's closest ally of his last years, William O'Brien, was elected to a committee chaired by Count Plunkett to organise the political leadership of the revival National Revolutionary Movement. O'Brien's Labour comrades made it clear that he compromised his trade union position by this membership, and he resigned from what was to be the organising body for the new Sinn Féin. The citizen army was frozen out of Liberty Hall. In 1918, with both Republican and Labour movements growing, and having organised a general strike against conscription, O'Brien was proposed as anti-conscription candidate in the Cavan East by-election. The nomination he refused, leaving the seat to be won by the right-wing Sinn Féiner Arthur Griffith. Accordingly, in the subsequent general election, Labour's small political clout meant that it had to choose between accepting Sinn Féin's terms tying it to membership of prospective Noel Aaron or not to contest nationalist seats. It chose the latter. In the Anglo-Irish War after 1919, there were several effective work stoppages in support of Republican demands, but they were all initiated under pressure from the rank and file. Labour's leaders proceeded, according to the dictum, hasten slowly. Unfortunately, history had accelerated to overtake them. That this was more than just avoiding the national issue is shown by their record in workplace disputes. Militancy in these was stimulated by the militancy shown in the strikes on the political front. The newly organised workers mobilised to gain what was owing them. Their readers surfaced their activism with reasonable efficiency, but the Irish Transport Union President Horan expressed his view in the remark, "Today we set everything by negotiation." The Labour could not negotiate its way into state power, and its leaders would not seek it. Still, Sinn Féin sought to stop Labour doing so. In early 1918, the Home Rule MP, Joe Devlin, backed by the Freeman's Journal, accused Eamon de Valera of having ordered Labour must wait. This campaign had little support in Devlin's party and did not survive nationalist Ireland's need to unite against conscription, but the smear lingered. In reality, Sinn Féin's and de Valera's approach to Labour was far more subtle, to absorb or neutralise, but not to commit too far. The Home Rulers' attack was prompted by de Valera's assurance that under the Republic, interpreted by the Home Rulers as only under the Republic, the Labour would have its full rights. Sinn Féin stressed its dedication to the 1916 Declaration, including Connolly's socialist aspirations and to the utopian socialism of George Russell's The National Being, which involved the peaceful, agreed replacement of capitalism by cooperation. It bargained with Labour over the 1918 general election. In exchange for promised international socialist support, it passed the first Noel's democratic programme, and then De Valera made the Labour sympathiser Constance Markievicz Minister for Labour. But what were Sinn Féin's projected social changes? The party declared these at its refounding convention, Ardèche, in November 1917. It adopted a number of Labour-supported minimum demands: equal rights for women, a living wage, no mention, by the way, of who would decide what was a living wage, the control of food exports to prevent famine, practical excuse for a series of arms raids, abandoned when they were completed at the end of the Poor Law. The other motions passed were simply bourgeois nationalists, though with a strong statist support. Later, De Valera would continue this ambivalence, balancing a qualified defense of the Bolsheviks in Chicago with a denunciation to the Irish-American mine bosses of Butte, Montana, of Larkin as having tried to help proselytize Catholic children in 1913. And at home, Owen MacNeill used economic ministries he held, which he knew he could not administer, as his authority for pontifications on Connolly's vision of Celtic socialism, presenting it simply as communal class collaboration. By the time of the truce with Britain in July 1921, Sinn Féin was the sole Irish challenger for state power. Labour was now irrelevant, and in the middle of a recession with the bosses mounting a counter-attack backed by the resources of the two states. Whether a more aggressive strategy would have given it the advantage can never be controlled. Certainly this would have required a leadership of greater consciousness than that accepted by Connolly or before America by Larkin. As it was, Irish Labour did wait, and it has waited as a class ever since. Let us end this one. Thank you.
This is a song, it's called The Enemy Gun. It's about the Spanish Civil War. Spanish freedom, many Irishmen were slain, killed by the fascist bullets in the Civil War in Spain. Battle tired and weary, they fought side by side, from Granada to Salamanca, in the dusty fields they died. Pick up your rifle and your blanket, for tonight you must fight on the run, and pray your God will keep you safe from the enemy's gun. From Madrid to Barcelona, the streets of every town, Franco gave the orders to hunt those rebels down. And in the battle for Toledo, when the country was ablaze, the mighty Franco's army bombarded the rebels for days. up your rifle and your blanket, for tonight you will fight on the run, and pray to your God to keep you safe from the enemy's gun. A mother cries, a sweetheart listen. The sound of your footsteps down the lane, but it's just the sound of a memory. You won't be coming home again. Pick up your rifle and your blanket, for tonight you must fight on the run, and pray that your God will keep you safe from the fascist gun. Well, on the hilltops they perished, the olive groves, in the cities and the pueblos, where the winds of freedom blow. But they will not be forgotten, no, they did not die in vain, those who fought the fascist armies in the civil war in Spain. Pick up your rifle and your blanket, for tonight you will sleep on the run, and pray your God will